Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Today I'm going to be talking about verse 22 of Guru Vācaka Kōvai. In previous months, I spoke about the previous verses in this chapter. I'll just quickly go through the meaning of those and then come to this one. In verse 19, what Bhagavan says is, since cause alone is seen as effect, what is meant here by cause is what is known in Sanskrit as the upadana karana. That is the upadana literally means appropriated, but in effect it means the material cause, the substance of which something is made. So, for example, gold is the cause and ornaments are the effect, or wood is the cause and tables and chairs are the effects. So in that sense, the word cause is being used here. So since cause alone is seen as effect, and since chinmayam, that is what is made of consciousness, which is the cause of a vast world, which sastras describe as mere names and forms, is palm-nelly real, save that the vast world is real. So what he means when he says palm nelly real, that means as real as a nelly fruit or an amlaka fruit in the palm. That's an analogy that is often, or it's an expression that is often used in Indian languages to say that something is very patently real, very obviously real. If you've got an amlaka fruit in your hand, it's so obvious. So that means when Bhagavan says palm nelly real, it means as obviously real as a palm nelly in the hand. So the one thing that is obviously real is consciousness. And since it is consciousness alone that is seen as this vast world, the vast world is real. In that sense, that is just like the snake is unreal as a snake, but real as a rope. This world is unreal as world, but it is real as the consciousness of which it is constituted. That is the idea in that verse. And then in 20, he says, when seeing the material cause, because of it existing unceasingly, the three or seven, well, he said the 3 7, that can mean the 3 times 7 or the 3 or 7 worlds are real. That means all worlds, if we see the substance of which they are made, namely consciousness, and because that substance exists eternally, therefore, in that sense, the world is real. But when seeing name and form, which are the imperishable effect, even the cause will be seen as if a complete nothingness. That is, when we see the world as just a multitude of names and forms, the underlying reality will be obscured. It will appear as if it's nothing. That is, what appears so real is this world, and because we overlook the underlying reality, which is consciousness. So if we see the world as it actually is, which is an infinite and undivided space of consciousness, one only without a second, then it is real. But if we see it in this multitude of names and forms, that one underlying reality is thereby obscured and seems as if it's nothing at all. Just like if we recognize that what seems to be a snake is actually just a rope, then it is real. But if we see it as a snake, if we think it's really a snake, then the rope which actually exists there seems to be non-existent. And in verse 21, he says, for those who enjoy as real the world perceived in front, it is said to be God's creation. For those who have attained certain knowledge of the unbound reality of oneself, that world is actually just mere mind. It's a mental fabrication, a binding delusion. So in these verses, what he's been contrasting is the vivid distinction between the underlying substance and the superficial appearance. The underlying substance is real, the appearance is unreal. And then in verse 22, the verse I'm going to talk about today, the literal meaning of the verse is, know that the trifling world appearance of name and form, which is the five sense impressions in the pure Paramatma Swarupa, is a divine play of Maya, the mind, which appears as a fabrication in that Sat-Chit Swarupa. So to explain that a bit more fully, know that the trifling, the word for trifling, tuccia, is it can mean trifling or empty or non-existent world appearance of name and form. That is something very, very trivial, very insignificant, or because it's empty, it's got no reality of its own. So know that the trifling world appearance of name and form, which is nothing but the five kinds of sense impression perceived in the pure Paramatma Swarupa. Paramatma means literally it means supreme self. It means what we actually are. Swarupa, and again, Swarupa means what we actually are. So Paramatma Swarupa is our self as we actually are. That this trifling world appearance is a divine play of Manamaya. Manamaya means a mind Maya. That implies Maya, which is the mind. Bhagavan often uses this term Manamaya, because Maya is not some external thing, it's nothing but this mind, which appears in the reality that we actually are. And this Manamaya, which appears as a fabrication in that Sat-Chit Swarupa. Sat-Chit means being awareness. That is pure being, pure awareness. And that is Swarupa, what we actually are. So, and when he says that it's nothing, but it is the five sense impressions, this is, he's alluding here to what he says in verse 6 of Uludu Napadu, in which he says the world is just the five kinds of sense impression, nothing else. That is what the world as we know it is nothing but a collection of the five kinds of sense impression, namely sights, sounds, tastes, smells, tactile sensations. If we take away these things, where is any world? So in verse 6 of Uludu, Bhagavan says the world is nothing but these five kinds of sense impressions. And since it's the one mind that experiences this world through the five senses, is there a world apart from the mind? What he implies is that the world has no existence other than the mind. And the same thing he's saying here, this entire world appearance, it's a mere play of the mind, which is Maya. And that mind appears as a fabrication in the underlying reality, which is Sat-Chit Swarupa. Murugan's paraphrase of this verse, the meaning of his paraphrase is, it is appropriate to accept or trust or be sure that the trifling, empty or non-existent world appearance of name and form, which is the form of the five kinds of sense objects, seen or perceived in the perfectly pure Paramatma Swarupa, is a divine play of Manamaya, Maya the mind, which appears as a fabrication in that Satya Jnana, within bracket, Paramatma Swarupa. That is, the word in the verse there is Sat-Chit Swarupa. Sat-Chit is Satya Jnana. Satya means what is real, or what actually is. In other words, Sat, pure being, and Jnana means the same as a chit, consciousness. So it's pure being, awareness, being consciousness. And that being consciousness is what is referred to earlier as Paramatma Swarupa. That's why he puts Paramatma in brackets. So the mind is a fabrication in that Satchit Swarupa, and it's only in the view of the mind that this world appears. And Sadhu Om's paraphrase is similar. In the pure nature of the of Suddha, in the pure nature of the ultimate self, Suddha Atma Swarupa, know that this insignificant world appearance of names and forms, which is perceived as the form of the five kinds of sense impression, is simply the divine play of Maya, the mind, which appears as an illusion, as if it were what had come into being in that Atma Swarupa, which is Satchit, being awareness. And then Sadhu Om gives an explanation. Since Maya means she who is not, its origin can never be known, and hence it is said to be beginningless. It appears and functions as a mind, but is attributed to God because of his seeming actions of creation, sustenance, and dissolution of the entire universe. When the reality of it is known, Maya ends, being seen to be ever non-existent. The seer, who is ego or mind, and the seen, which is the world, rise and subside simultaneously in Atma Swarupa. When we see ourselves through ourself alone, we are Atma Swarupa. But when we see ourselves through the mind, the seer, we appear as the world, the seen. So does anyone have any questions about the meaning of this verse?
There is a question from Rati. Rati, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, Michael, I was going to say that with the development of the kalpana of the fabrication of mind and Maya, and the play of mind and Maya in the Satchit, can it be said that Vairagya develops, and there's more, dispassion of Vairagya, where there's less attraction and less aversion, develops slowly when you can completely and fully believe that this is a kalpana, this is a fabrication, that this sense objects and this world of sense objects is truly a fabrication. If one can truly internalize that, then then I think dispassion can grow. And also, when one also, as you rightly said, about the creation, dissolution, and sustenance, God isn't there to create, dissolve, or sustain, really, in the real sense. He just is, right? He just is a being.
Yes.
He just exists as Satchitananda. So existing as that, he only is, and his isness and his being is all there is. And so when we want to, what we have to do to be our best Atma Swarup, to be within our, to immerse in our own Atma Swarup or Atman, is to really to be and to not rise to, to act on our vasanas and to act on this or that. Of course, we will rise to act on our shubha or ashubha vasanas, but if we can develop more of the shubha vasanas, that's good, no doubt. But at some point, we have to get beyond all the gunas and everything, and ultimately just be in a sense of, just practice vairagya, which is, not too repelled or not too attracted really to anything, because you realize that this is just a fabrication, right? Would you say so?
Well, yes. But what is important to understand, what Bhagavan refers to here as Manamaya, is nothing but ego. And the nature of ego, as he makes clear in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, is clinging to form. That is, ego has no separate existence of its own. So it seems to have a separate existence only when it identifies itself as a form, namely the form of a body, consisting of 5 sheaves. So ego cannot stand for a moment ego cannot come into being or stand for a moment without grasping form, without identifying itself with a body. And having identified itself as a body, it then is constantly attending to other forms. That's what Bhagavan refers to in the 3rd sentence of verse 25, when he says, Uru patri undu mika ongam, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. So it comes into being, grasping form. It stands grasping form. In those first 2 sentences, grasping form is referring to the identification with the form of a body as I. In the 3rd sentence, when he says grasping and feeding on forms, he means all the other forms that we're constantly attending to. So from this, we have to understand the very nature of the mind is clinging. And clinging means, because the ego cannot stand for a moment without clinging to form, the inclination to cling to form, which is what is called Vishaya Vasana, the Vishaya Vasanas are it's the very nature of ego to have Vishaya Vasanas. So desire, it's the nature of ego to have desires, attachments, likes, dislikes, and so on. When such is the case, how can this ego develop vairagya? Vairagya means freedom from desire for all these things. Vairagya is contrary to the very nature of ego. Ego will always be trying to cling to something for its very survival. So the vairagya, which is the other side of bhakti, which is the love to hold on to our own being and thereby subside back into our being, that cannot come from ego, because it's contrary to the very nature of ego. The bhakti and vairagya comes only from our own real nature. And our own real nature, as Bhagavan explains in other verses of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, which I've spoken about recently, that our own real nature is itself grace. So grace is that inner light, that clarity that enables us to see this world for what it is, which is just a divine play of Maya, as Bhagavan puts it. There he uses the term he uses for divine play is tiruvilayatu. Tiru means, in this context, it means divine. So why does he call the play of Maya as divine? Because this entire divine play of creation, sustenance, and dissolution, this is all the work of Maya. That is why in Shaivism, they talk not only about creation, sustenance, and dissolution, they also talk about veiling and grace. These are what are called the Panchakritiyas, the 5 divine functions. As Bhagavan says in the 15th paragraph of Nana, all these 5 divine functions, these all happen by Isan Sanidana Visesha Matrata, by the mere special nature of the presence of God. The presence of God means God's being. And its special nature is God is not just pure being. He is also pure awareness, pure happiness, and pure love. So that love, the love of God is what manifests as grace. Among these 5 functions, the creation, sustenance, and dissolution can only go on so long as we do not know ourselves as we actually are. So that is why the 4th divine function is said to be tirodhana, which is veiling. That is God. In theistic terms, it's explained God is hiding himself from us. It's only when God hides himself from us that this creation, sustenance, and dissolution appears. But God hiding himself from us, the deeper meaning of that is what is concealed from us is our own real nature, because God is our own real nature. God is what we actually are. So long as we don't know ourselves as we actually are, this creation, this appearance of creation, sustenance, and dissolution goes on. The birth, the life, and the death goes on. Um, so all this is it's all a play of Maya. So what is sometimes in the Puranas, and Puranas and that type of literature, it's often said that all this world is God's Leela. In Tamil, the term for God's Leela is Tiruvilayatu, the divine play. But all this divine play is actually a play of Maya. So the most important function of God, that is, uh, without the veiling, none of these three, this creation, sustenance, and dissolution cannot go on. The most important function of God is the fifth one, anugraha. Anugraha is grace, which is removing of the veil. Once the veil is removed, the creation, sustenance, and dissolution come to an end because they're a mere appearance. So that is what is revealed by grace. So if when we begin to develop bhakti and vairagya, bhakti not in any superficial sense, but in the deep sense of the intense love to subside and surrender ourselves back to God, who is our own reality. And for that, we need intense vairagya. We need to be free of desire and attachment for anything else. That happens only by grace. And the nature of grace, grace is it's our own very being. The grace is the very nature of God, because God is pure being, and pure being is pure love, and that pure love is what we experience as grace. So ultimately, it's only by grace that this play of Maya is brought to an end. But grace, as Bhagavan said, grace is not something external to us. It's not some power up in heaven that one day is going to descend on us. Grace is ever present in our heart. It's ever shining in our heart as our own being, I am. So it's ever available to us. But in order to avail ourselves of it, in order to benefit from the grace that is ever shining in our heart, we need to be willing to turn within. But even that willingness to turn within, ultimately, that also comes only from grace. It's grace that gives us that love to turn within. So all this entire play of Maya, the mind, cannot be ended by any power other than the supreme power of grace, which is the very nature of God, who is our own very nature, what we actually are. Does that clarify what you were saying?
Yes, this is a complete summary and beautiful explanation for almost how all of this works, including the veiling and the grace.
Yeah.
And grace is, as is just it doesn't descend from heaven, as you rightly said, or from the skies. It's really within us, and we have to
Yes.
avail of it by
Yes.
going within. The more we turn
Yes.
within, the more we tap into it, right?
Yes. Yes.
So,
But
yes.
because we identify ourselves with this body, we seem
Mhm.
to be something very small and insignificant. So God seems to be something other than ourselves. So we have this idea God is up there high above and his grace will descend on us. That's all okay. I mean, all religions are based on that type of belief in God as a higher power. But as we go deeper, as by his grace we go deeper in this path, it becomes clear that the God who previously seemed to be something external to ourselves is actually our own reality. And his grace is ever shining in our heart as our own being. So in order to yield ourselves to his grace, in order to attune ourselves to his grace, we need to turn within and subside back into the heart. We subside back into the heart merely by turning our attention back within.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Michael, and
Right,
won't take any more of your time.
right.
Thank you. Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana.
Michael, in relation to what you just said about this thing, sort of a notion that all sort of religions have a notion of a kind of a transcendent God up there, I just want to say that we tend to think that that is the case, but what I found when I was teaching is that it's really only the Abrahamic traditions that have this notion of a sort of an entity up there. The others may have notions of sort of these kind of folk deities or a sort of an immanent. It's usually something far more immanent, much closer to the sort of thing you find in Indian traditions.
I think even in the Abrahamic traditions, there are, I mean, very different. In any religion, there are different levels of belief. So even in Abrahamic religions, they talk about God being both immanent and transcendent. He's transcendent because he's beyond all this. I mean, he's beyond all the limitations of this world. So in that sense, he's transcendent. But he's as Bhagavan says in these verses, he's the very substance of which this world is made. So in that sense, he is immanent. He's omnipresent, present everywhere. But the distinction I was making, that is all, even in Vedanta, we begin with, that is, most forms of Vedanta are they see some distinction between God and the jiva. So God is another. It's only in Advaita that we go beyond this, or the idea is emphasized that God is not something other than ourselves. He is our own reality. I mean, it's there throughout Vedanta, but the same Vedanta that is interpreted by the Advaitins, I mean, it's very obvious the Advaita implication of the Upanishads, and in so many of the verses of Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra, there's a very clear Advaitic implication. But others interpret it, they don't, for them, it's many people don't relish the idea that God is nothing but our own being, that we and God are totally non-different. So most forms of Vedanta accept some type of difference. So Beda. We are non-different, but at the same time different from God. Or God is non-different, but at the same time different from us. Or there's the pure dualism of Madhvacharya, that God is wholly distinct from us. Or the Vishishtadvaita, where it's conceived God is the whole and we are parts. So they all like to see some distinction between ourselves and God. But this is what Bhagavan refers to in verse 8 of Upadesha, where he says that rather than Anya Bhava, Ananya Bhava is best among all. Anya Bhava means the attitude that God is something other than ourselves. Ananya Bhava is the recognition that He is I, that God is nothing other than our own, but God is what we actually are. So I think it's there in all religions to a greater or lesser extent. It begins with the idea that God is wholly other, and slowly it progresses towards the recognition that God is actually nothing other than ourselves. Because if God was something other than ourselves, if we were something other than God, then God would thereby be limited. If God is really, in the Upanishads it said, Satyam Jnanam Anantam, being, awareness, infinite. So if God is really infinite, there cannot be anything other than Him. He has to be Ekameva Advaitiyam, one only without a second. This is the central message of Vedanta, but it's interpreted in so many ways by different people. Because many people don't relish the idea that God is wholly non-different to ourselves, non-different than ourselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the notion of God as such, howsoever it's interpreted, is very much sort of it's tied to the idea that this is a theism. And
Yeah.
so, for example, and I just wonder about how really, whether this sort of a borrowing from the English language, from the Abrahamic traditions, can sometimes be a little bit obscuring or not allow certain aspects which are specific to Indian or other traditions to come out. Because, for example, the Buddhists and Jains, who in fact do not see that distinction between your own self, your own awareness, and whatever the true reality is, I mean, going towards that, are said to be atheists, which is, I mean, which if we are to say that it is consciousness in some sort of or sort of self-awareness, which is a kind of ultimate reality in some sense, in some sort of a non-dual awareness. It's also the case with the Jains as well as the Buddhists, that experientially this is what is and leads to the ultimate truth. And they forego, and they have deities, depending on, this sort of, which is fine, but that's at a conventional kind of everyday level. You can do whatever you wish to, which is also the case with so-called Hinduism and all the rest of it. So, I mean, so it's a bit kind of obfuscating because that distinction between a sort of a higher power and the lower being, who is stretching. I think part of the Indian traditions, and I think this is from the Vedic right to now, and that includes the Buddhists, the Jains, I mean, there are so many, really. There is this attempt, really, I mean, the vocabulary is not one which really lends itself to that separateness in one way or the other. And I mean, there are different approaches depending on, I mean, there are all sorts of perspectives, but they're approaching a similar thing, I feel. It just struck me that, and then, of course, the way it's conventionally and usually sort of talked about is that, well, these are atheists. There is no God there. And yes, there is no God there in any kind of a conventional sense. But then, that sort of puts the entire discourse into an entirely kind of irrelevant sort of domain for our purposes. Anyway,
I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
That is, in many traditions, particularly the Abrahamic religions and many forms of Vedanta, God is absolutely central to that tradition. In the case of Advaita, because Advaita is, because of the theistic elements of Vedanta, Advaita is very comfortable with the idea of God. But it emphasizes that God is not another. God is our own Tattvamasi. You are that. That is what is emphasized in Advaita. But Advaita could equally well stand without any idea of God. I mean, the core philosophy of Advaita doesn't depend upon the concept of God. But in the actual practice of Advaita, the concept of God is very, very useful, particularly grace, and this is very much emphasized, even in, I mean, some people consider that is Advaita to be some sort of dispensing with the need for God. But actually in practice, we can see, I mean, in Bhagavan's life, we very, very clearly, we can see how much emphasis he puts on grace. And even Adi Shankara has written such wonderful hymns. So the grace, and God's grace is very central to the practice of Advaita. It's not it's not essential to the philosophy of Advaita. We can, I mean, we don't have to bring in the concept of God in order to understand Advaita. But since the concept is there, since Advaita developed within a theistic culture, it accepts God, but emphasizes that God is not another. So there are so many different ways of approaching the same subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to realize that most of the Indian traditions which have come down to us, sort of prior to Bhakti traditions coming on board, whenever
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
from about the 5th to the 10th centuries, they came up.
yeah,
They're not, in fact, what you would classify as theistic. For example, even Sankhya and the rest, they don't really have a notion which could be
no,
translated as God.
yeah,
And you look at all the early traditions, the
mm,
Ajivikas, this one, and there's all this sort of debate going on and flourishing of, of
yeah,
self-investigation is the only way. It's the investigation by the jiva, of life, of
yeah,
world,
yeah,
what is really real here. And it's amazingly interesting and sort of based in really introspecting. And there
yes,
isn't, the sort of stuff which you have post Bhakti or post, sort of after the
yeah,
5th or 10th centuries. So I just think it's something which is important to keep on board, because even in the Vedic sort of tradition, the notion of the deities is really about these impersonal sense powers. The sort
yes,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
sort of impersonal, generalized sensory powers, cognitive
yes,
powers. These are the deities, as well
mm,
as sort of the other powers, of locomotion and all of
yeah,
that. So it's a very different. So actually, it's a very clear notion of what deities are, and
yeah,
then sort of at a more abstract level, what you can think of as God, so to speak. It
yes,
really is only your own awareness, or some kind of, like a slightly more restricted before the non-dual,
yeah,
because from the beginning, the Rig Veda, Nasadiya, you've got Ekam, which is
yes,
really that both the world and what underlies it and so on is this dynamic whole,
mm,
which is unbroken and seamless.
yes,
So it's quite interesting that that's a slightly different take, because every sort of culture has a certain take. Anyway, I will not take up any more
yes.
time. We will get on. So the question is, dear Michael, in some recent interviews, you were making it clear that what it means to attend to oneself. Still, isn't it the most difficult thing for people to really grasp? Whatever does it mean? For you, I guess the I is just movement, moving with the flow of things, without your interference, so to speak, and not being separate from the three instruments of action. Would it be helpful to just call it a falling into, an acceptance of whatever is happening here and now? Holding on to I guess, is being not a separate entity, to sort of take your attention away from whatever. You most probably have more than enough good ideas in your mailbox. So anyway, thank you for sharing these teachings. Thanks to Bhagwan.
Okay. Attending to ourself is actually very simple. Why? But it is true that for many people, it's difficult to grasp what self-attentiveness means. That is why in Advaita, um, i- Advaita begins with what are called prakriyas, which are different ways of analyzing our experience in order to distinguish ourselves from all that is experienced. So, um, one prakriya is to analyze the three states of waking, dream, and sleep, and to recognize that we are that which exists in all these three states. What exists in all these three states is only Satchit, pure being awareness, because the body and mind that we now take ourselves to be, this present body, appears in waking, disappears in dream and sleep. In dream, we experience another body as I. And though it's the same mind in both waking and dream, there's no mind at all in sleep. But we exist in sleep. and we are aware of being in sleep. So what we actually are is not this body or mind. That's one prakriya. Another prakriya is to distinguish what is changing from what is unchanging. Everything in our experience is changing. But the one thing that remains without changing is I. And another very important one is drik drisya viveka. That's distinguishing. Literally, it means distinguishing the seer from the seen. In other words, distinguishing the knower from the known, the experiencer from what is experienced, the subject from the object. So we are not any object of awareness. That is, for example, the person who wrote this said, for you, I guess, I is just movement. No, absolutely not. Movement is something that appears and disappears. We're aware of movement in waking and dream. In sleep, in dreamless sleep, there's no movement at all, but we exist there. So movement is just one among the many phenomena that appear and disappear in waking and dream. So we are not anything that appears and disappears. We are not, because whatever appears and disappears in whose view? In our view. So we are something distinct from everything that appears and disappears. So we are not this body, we are not this mind, we are not any phenomenon. We are that to which all phenomena appear. That is why Bhagavan often gave this clue for self-investigation. He gave the clue. He said, investigate to whom does it appear? Whatever may appear, to whom does it appear? It appears to us. That is, when Bhagavan says investigate to whom, he means turn our attention away from whatever appears and disappears back to ourself, in whose view or to whom it appears and disappears. So we need to, in order to understand what is meant by self-investigation, Atma-vichara, or self-attentiveness, we first need to think very deeply and carefully in order to distinguish ourselves from all phenomena, from everything that appears and disappears, everything that moves or changes. So whatever appears or disappears, appears and disappears in the view of something that is aware. So what is it that is aware of all these things? That is what we are to investigate. So when we attend to ourselves, we are not attending to any phenomena. We are attending only to ourselves, that to which that in whose view all phenomena appear and disappear. So this path of self-investigation, this practice of self-attentiveness, is very simple, but it's also very subtle. So we first need to have a clear understanding of what it is we are to attend to. We are not to attend to whatever is happening. Whatever is happening is all part of a phenomena. In whose view is it happening? To whom is it all happening? So our aim is to turn our attention away from whatever is happening back towards ourselves. Finally, the person who wrote this question wrote, holding on to I guess, is being. Yes, holding on to I is being. But in what sense is it being? That is, being is not something that comes and goes. Our own being is ever present. We are always being. Being is our very nature. But when we rise as ego, we are aware of the appearance of so many other things. So the state of ego, that is waking and dream, are states in which we are not just being, we are rising. We are rising to know all this. So Bhagavan has made it clear that the nature of ego is to rise. Well, ego cannot rise, stand, or flourish without constantly attending to things other than itself. So as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. And consequently, we're aware of the appearance of other things. This is the nature of ego. This is what is called rising. Because that is not our natural state. Our natural state of being, we can be without knowing anything other than ourselves. But so waking and dream, they're called states of rising because we rise as ego in order to identify a body as I and to know other things. So when instead of attending to anything other than ourselves, when we turn our attention back to ourselves, in other words, when we hold on to I, we as ego subside. And where do we subside? We subside back into our being. So to the extent to which we are attending to our being, we thereby subside and remain as being. So in that sense, yes, holding on to I is being. It is just being without rising. Even when we're attending to other things, we're still being, but we're not just being. We are rising to know all these other things. So we need to be being means in this context, being is to be understood as just being. In other words, being without rising as ego. So our being, what our being is what we actually are. What we actually are is pure awareness. What knows other things is ego or mind. Ego or mind is a form of awareness, but it is not pure awareness. It is awareness mixed and conflated with other things. Whereas our real nature, what we actually are, is pure awareness. So the state of pure being or just being is also the state of pure awareness. Pure awareness means mere awareness, awareness in which there's no awareness of anything other than ourself. Because awareness of other things appears in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. So that is not the real awareness. Anything that appears and disappears is unreal. What is real has to be permanent. So the only permanent awareness is the pure awareness. The underlying awareness, that is, we cannot be aware of things without being aware, but we can be aware without being aware of things. So it's that mere awareness, that pure awareness, that is what we actually are. So attending to our being, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves or attend to our being, we are thereby withdrawing our attention from other things. So when we attend to ourselves so keenly that we cease to be aware of anything other than ourselves, we then experience ourselves as pure awareness. And as soon as we experience ourselves as pure awareness, the the adjunct conflated awareness called ego is thereby dissolved. That is, what we actually are is the pure I am. But as ego, we're not aware of us. We are aware I am, but we're not aware of ourselves as just I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So this body, everything that we take ourselves to be, is called an adjunct. In Sanskrit, the term is upadhi. That means a limitation that we take upon ourselves. So we identify ourselves with this bundle of five sheaths, the body and mind, and take us and thereby limit ourselves. So ego is an impure awareness. It's adjunct conflated awareness. And so long as we rise as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am his body, and we're consequently aware of other things. But when we withdraw our attention from other things by focusing on on ourself, if we focus our attention on ourself, on our mere being, on the fundamental awareness I am, if we focus our attention keenly enough, we will thereby cease to be aware of anything else. And as soon as we cease to be aware of anything else, we experience ourselves as the pure awareness that we actually are. And as soon as we experience ourselves as the pure awareness that we actually are, this false awareness called ego is thereby dissolved, and we remain eternally as we actually are. So what is required is to focus our entire attention on our own being, on this fundamental awareness, I am. Of course, we need to think about it carefully in order to understand what this means. Once we've understood it, then we have to put it into practice by trying to attend to ourselves as much as we can. When we try to do so, we will all find that we rebel against it. We are there's a deep unwillingness. We have a deep unwillingness to attend to our own being, because attending to our own being is bringing about the dissolution of our separate existence as ego. So as ego, we're unwilling to we're unwilling to die. We're unwilling to lose our separate individuality. So we resist it. That is why patient and persistent practice is required. The more we try to attend to ourselves, the more the inclination to attend to other things, which are called Vishaya vasanas, they are weakened, and the love to attend to ourselves is strengthened. But it takes a lot of practice in order to cultivate this bhakti, or love to attend to ourselves, and vairagya, or freedom from any inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. But the first thing we need to understand is what is actually meant by self-attentiveness. And in order to understand what is meant by self-attentiveness, we need to understand what we actually are. We are not anything that appears and disappears. We're not this body, we're not this mind, we're not movement, we're not anything. We are the awareness in which all these things appear and disappear. So it's that awareness that we need to attend to. That awareness is our very being. That awareness is what exists and shines within us as our own being, I am. That is what we need to attend to. Not to the words I am, but what do the words I am refer to? They refer to our own being. That is what we need to attend to.
So the next question is the difficulty I have is understanding the nature of Sat Chit Anand, because we can't know it with the ego mind. It's like trying to understand what deep sleep is. We can't, because ego isn't present. The analogy of the snake and rope is limited because the mind can focus on the rope. So trying to know the self with the limited ego mind is impossible. So it seems like a void, but is actually fullness, wholeness. So trying to understand a world with no form and no name is very challenging from the point of view of the body-mind.
The term Satchidananda is used to make us understand that it is what is ever present. Do we not know being? Do we not know our own being? Do we not know I am? We all know I am. The fact that we know I am means we're aware. That means I am is our being. The fact that we know I am, that knowing of I am is awareness. So we all know we all know being. We all know what it is to be. We all know what it is to be aware. So the Sat and the Chit we are already aware of. We also know happiness. We are all seeking happiness. And we enjoy a little bit of happiness here and there. But we don't experience that happiness in its fullness, but nobody can say that they have no idea what happiness is. Every sentient being is seeking happiness. So how can we seek something if we don't have? I mean, we seek happiness because we know what happiness is. We know the difference between being happy and unhappy. So Satchidananda is the one thing that is known to all of us. It's not some distant thing. Why it may seem to us to be unknown, because Satchidananda, Sat is pure being, Chit is pure awareness, Ananda is pure happiness. That we may not experience now. The reason we don't experience it now, though that is what we actually are, is because we now mistake ourselves to be a set of adjuncts, namely this bundle of 5 sheaths called body or person. The person we take ourselves to be consists of 5 sheaths. That's the physical form of this body, the life that animates this body, and the mind, intellect, and will that function within this body. These 5 collectively make up the person we take ourselves to be. This is what Bhagavan refers to as body. That is, when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we're never aware of a dead body as I. The body that we experience as I is always a living body. So it's the body and life are there. And we never experience a sleeping body as I. It's always, the body that we experience as I always seems to be awake. Even in dream, the body that we take to be I seems to be awake at that time. So in a body that seems to be awake, there is also a mind, intellect, and will functioning within it. So this is what we now experience ourselves to be. Because we mistake ourselves to be these things, which are not what we actually are, because we exist and shine even in the absence of these things in sleep. We are clearly aware that we are when we wake up from sleep, we say, I slept happily, I had a peaceful sleep. How can we be aware of having been in a state if we were not aware of being in that state while we were in that state? Of course, in sleep, we are not aware, I am without thought. We are just aware, I am. But we are clearly aware I am. If we think about it carefully, we are clearly aware of our being in sleep. Because if we were not aware of our being in sleep, how can we be aware now that we were in a state in which we were not aware of anything? When we say we were not aware of anything in sleep, that means we were not aware of any phenomena. But we were aware of our being in that state. Because how else can we, supposing, as people generally suppose, that sleep is a state of unconsciousness, supposing there's absolutely no awareness in sleep at all, how would we know we were in such a state? All we would be aware of is a seemingly unbroken succession of alternating states of waking and dream. But we're not aware of that. We're clearly aware that there's a third state in which we're not aware of anything other than ourselves. The fact that we're aware of having been in that state means we were aware when we were in that state. So we exist and shine in all 3 states. The body and mind and world, they appear and they disappear. But the one thing that never either appears nor disappears is our own being, our own fundamental awareness, I am. That is Satchidananda. That is what we actually are. So we shouldn't think of it as some unknown thing. It's Sat is our own very being. That is, we cannot be sure of the existence of anything other than ourselves. All we can say about other things is they seem to exist. This world seems to exist. But does it actually exist? We can't be sure. It could all be an illusion. It could be just a dream. So the only existence or being of which we can be certain is our own being, our own existence. That alone we can be sure of. Other things may not exist. They may be just an illusion. But one thing that cannot be an illusion is our own being, our own existence. So we are clearly aware that we exist. We are clearly aware that we are aware, because we couldn't, I mean, we couldn't know anything if we were not aware. So we know that we are, and we know that we're aware. That is Sat-Chit. And we know that the one thing that we always are seeking is happiness. And we experience little iotas of happiness here and there. But whatever happiness we seem to experience, but whatever happiness we experience seemingly as a result of getting whatever we desire, never satisfies us. However much we may desire something, when we get it, momentarily we feel happy. But because the agitation or restless is in the form of desire, but was existing all this time, is momentarily satisfied or quietened by achieving that. But as soon as we get what we want, we begin to want something else. If we always lived in poverty and we want to have $1,000 or £1,000 or 1,000 rupees, whatever it may be, that may seem to be a very big amount when we don't have it. As soon as we get it, it seems very trifling. Now we want 10,000. When we get 10,000, we want 100,000. Once we get 100,000, we want 1,000,000. And as Bhagavan said about desire, the nature of desire, so long as we don't achieve what we desire, our desire will make even a molehill, even a small heap of earth, seem like Mount Meru. But once we achieve it, even Mount Meru will seem like some trifling, small amount of dirt, of a small heap of mud. So the nature of desire, it will always make the desired object seem very big until we get it. And once we get it, we want something. It's not all that we took it to be. So we want something more. We want something more. So desire can never be satisfied. So the problem with desire, that is the driving force behind any desire, is the fundamental desire that we all have to be happy. We all like to be happy. So if we think that I'll be happy if I have 10,000 or $100,000 or pounds or rupees or whatever it may be, we will that will seem to be very, very big achievement if we can get that. Once we get it, we want more. We want more. So desire, we can never satisfy our desires. We can never find real happiness in the satisfaction of desires. The real happiness is our very being. So in order to experience the infinite happiness that we actually are, it's necessary for us to know ourselves. This is what Bhagavan says in the very first sentence of Nana. He ends by saying, in order to experience that happiness, which is our real nature, which we experience daily in sleep, it is necessary for oneself to know oneself. In other words, it's necessary for us to know what we actually are. And for that, the principal means is the investigation, who am I?
I think so, Michael. The next question is, Namaskaram, Michael. My understanding of Eka Jiva Vada is this. The ego has never truly been annihilated. With practice, one day it will be destroyed, and that will instantly bring the universe to an end. Even the story that Venkataramanam attained realization is only a story, albeit a helpful one. If so, this suggests the endeavor is truly one and done, and has never been completed before, which is mind-boggling. It is logical from the perspective of the I am, but it's very difficult for the mind to grapple with. Any thoughts?
Yes, that is, it's just like in a dream. In a dream, so long as we're dreaming, everything in the dream seems to be real. So in the dream, we have memories of our past. We may remember our childhood and everything, because in dream we seem to be the same person we are now. So we may remember our childhood, and we may meet someone, and we may ask about their life, and they may tell us the story of their life and everything. All that seems to be real, so long as we are dreaming. But when we wake up from that dream, all the people who appeared in that dream, we will recognize they were all a mental fabrication. Not only the other people, but even the person we took ourselves to be in a dream, that is also a mental fabrication. That is, the dreamer, when we dream, we experience ourselves as a person in that dream. But the dreamer is not that the person in that dream. The dreamer is the I that is aware of itself as I am this person. So there is an I that is aware of itself as the person we take ourselves to be. Because this person seems to be I, when we see other people, they also seem to be I. They also seem to be an I. That is there's something in this that is now aware of itself as I am this body. And when we see other people, because they seem to be just like this person we seem to be, they also seem to be other egos. So long as we're looking outwards, there seems to be a multitude of egos. So, for example, the story of Bhagavan's life. Bhagavan, a young boy, Venkataraman, he seemed to be a person like other people. There was an I there, but it was aware of itself as I am Venkataraman. Then, but that I was obviously not an ordinary. I mean, it was the jiva that seemed to exist there was obviously an extremely mature jiva. So as soon as that fear of death came, it turned its attention inwards and it merged back into the underlying reality. And that ego was annihilated. As you say, so long as this world seems to be true, that is also true. But this is not the ultimate truth. Ultimately, well, it's not even all this seems true in this dream that we are now experiencing. So, in a dream, how many eyes are actually experiencing the dream? Though we see many people in a dream, and every other person seems to be another I, another ego, another jiva, seems to be, if we ask other people in our dream, do you see this? Yes, I see it. So there seem to be so many eyes there. But all those many eyes exist in the view, in whose view? In the view of that one eye that is dreaming. So all this, so long as we experience this dream, it all seems to be real. All the many objects in this world seem to be real, but all the many sentient beings, not only human beings, but also other animals we see in a dream, they all seem to be sentient beings. They all seem to be aware. But they all seem to be aware because because as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this person. So every other person seems to be an ego just like us. It all seems real so long as we're dreaming. As soon as we wake up from a dream, we instantly recognize that it's a mental fabrication. What brings about that change? What makes the dream seem real is because in dream we experience the dream body as I. Because we experience the dream body as I, what is actually real is only I. When we experience the dream body as I, that dream body therefore seems to be real. And that dream body is a small part of a big dream world. So the whole dream world seems to be real. So long as we are identified with that dream body as I. When we wake up from a dream, our identification switches from that dream body to this present body. And so as soon as our identification with that dream body is severed, we instantly recognize, oh, it was just a dream. It was just a mental fabrication. Everything I saw in the dream, all the people, none of them existed independent of my perception of it. It was all a creation of my own mind. We recognize that what a moment before seemed so real and seemed to have an independent existence. In dream, when we see the world, we think the world exists independent of us. If we ask people in dream, they'll say, yes, of course, this world existed before you were born. It's going to exist after you die. And it seems to us that that is the case. But when we wake up from a dream, we recognize it was all a mental fabrication. According to Drishti Shrishti Vada, Drishti means perception or seeing. Shrishti means creation. So, and Vada means a contention. So, Drishti Shrishti Vada is the contention that creation has no existence independent of perception. So this world seems to exist because we perceive it. That is what Bhagavan taught. And Drishti Shrishti Vada always goes along with Ekajiva Vada, because Drishti Shrishti Vada it means that this, what we're now experiencing, is no more real than a dream. The dream world and everything we experience in the dream has no existence independent of our perception of it. According to Drishti Shrishti Vada, this present waking state is no different to that. So just like in dream there's only one dreamer, that means there's only one jiva that is experiencing all this. But in the view of that one jiva, there seem to be so many other jivas. So long as we're, that's why we need to distinguish this. Ekajiva Vada is a type of what is called solipsism. But it is, we need to distinguish. It's a metaphysical solipsism. It is not a social solipsism. Social solipsism is if you think I'm the only person, I'm the only real person, everyone else is my creation. That is a misunderstanding because we're taking ourselves to be a person. The person we take ourselves to be is as unreal as every other person. But so long as we take ourselves to be this person seems to be a sentient being, and every other person seems to be a sentient being. So Bhagavan never advocated social solipsism, having the attitude that other people don't matter because they're all my own mental creation. That's not how we should live in this world. So long as we are experiencing the world, we should behave in this world appropriately. So it seems to us that other people are sentient beings just like us. And so if someone is hurt, we should try to alleviate their pain. If someone is hungry, we should try to give them food. So this isn't social solipsism. This is metaphysical solipsism. But underneath all this appearance, there is one experiencer, namely I. I am the one who is experiencing all this. All this multiplicity of jivas appear in the view of this one I, this one jiva. So that's why I say it is a metaphysical solipsism. And there's a verse in Guru Vācaka Kōvai, I can't remember the number offhand, but in that Bhagavan says, for those who have great courage, it is appropriate to take to accept that jiva is only one and to turn within to find out who is that one jiva. I'm paraphrasing it, but something to this effect, he says. Only for the sake of the less mature people who aren't ready to accept that, it is said that jivas are many. But the important thing in that verse, Bhagavan points out what is the purpose of this teaching. The purpose of this teaching is not to change our behavior in this world, but to turn our attention back within. To whom does all this multiplicity of jivas, this world in which so many jivas seem to exist, to whom does it all appear? That is the aim of Ekajivavada, turning our attention back to ourselves. Who is this I in whose view all this multiplicity seems to exist? That is the way to return to the ultimate oneness in which there's not even a jiva. That is, Ekajivavada it's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that there's no jiva at all. What exists is only what is. What we all actually are, which is Satchidananda, that alone is eternally what alone exists. But so long as we experience all this multiplicity, there seems to be at least one jiva, in whose view all the many other jivas seem to exist. So who is this one jiva in whose view all these many other jivas seem to exist? That is what we need to investigate by turning our attention back within to see what we actually are.
So the question is, dear Michael, based on the fruits of the Sanchita karma of the collective, this means that this apparent dream world would just get worse in time. And lastly, please, are we reborn in the same dream world in our next lives?
Well, Sanchita is not. Sanchita is what Bhagavan says in verse 38 of Uludunapadu. If we are the doer of actions, we will experience the resulting fruit. Vinay mudal na mayin vile payan tuipom. So long as we experience ourselves as the doer of actions, so long as we act under the sway of our will, those actions we do under the sway of our will, under the sway of our vasanas, are what are called agamya. Agamya bears fruit. The fruit of agamya is stored in Sanchita. And from Sanchita, God selects for each life which fruit will be most conducive to our spiritual development. And that the portion of fruit that he selects for each life is what is called prarabdha. So that determines all that we are to experience, all that we are given to experience in each life. So this is, it's not a collective sanchita. We each have our own, we've each done certain actions in the past. Those actions bear fruit. The fruit that we haven't yet experienced are stored in what is called sanchita. The word sanchita simply means a heap or pile. So it's where it's, well, it's not a place, but it's metaphorically speaking, it's where all the fruits of our karmas are stored. And the karma cannot give fruit except by the ordainment of God. So we experience only those fruit that God selects for us to experience in each life. I've forgotten what the rest of the question was. Sorry, Shalini. I'm not sure whether I've answered it fully or just partially. Can you read the question again?
The question is, based on the fruits of Sanchita karma of the collective, this means that this apparent dream world would just get worse in time. And lastly, please, are we reborn in the same dream world in our next lives?
Okay, about it getting worse, good or bad is we judge according to our likes and dislikes. We judge what is good and bad. The things we like, we call good. The things we dislike, we call bad. So, for example, we don't like war. Therefore, we say war is bad. We don't like being hungry. Therefore, we say starvation is bad. We don't like injustice. Therefore, we say injustice is bad. We do like to live in a world of justice, of fairness, where everyone is given equal opportunity and everything. Therefore, we say these things are good. But things that we think are good, other people may think are bad. Not everyone wants to live in a world of justice. There are many people who want to get more for themselves than for others. So it's all what we call good or bad. There are people in this world who we see leaders who start wars unnecessarily. For them, it may be good what they're doing, but for most of us, it's bad what they're doing. So it's all a matter of good and bad is a matter of perspective. That's the first thing to understand. Secondly, depending on what type of actions we've done in the past, sanchita is a mixture of good and bad fruit. That is, if we've done bad actions, there'll be bad fruit. If we've done good actions, there'll be good fruit. So, I mean, God alone can judge what his actions are good and what are bad and decide the appropriate fruit for each action. But for all of us, we have done good things in the past and we've done bad things in the past. The things that now may horrify us. Those are things that in the past we may have done because we gradually, through the course of many lives, we by Bhagavan's grace, we are gradually maturing spiritually. And as we mature spiritually, we are more inclined to do to be kind, to be generous, to be considerate of others, to want what is good for everyone. But we haven't always been like this. In the past, we would have been selfish, we would have been mean, we would have been inconsiderate. So we've no doubt done the horrors that we see in this world. These are things we ourselves may have done, not in this lifetime, not maybe not for many lifetimes, but before that we would have done these bad things. So we've all got a mixture of that is a sanchita of each one of us is a mixture of good and bad fruit. But for sanchita, that is the actions cannot bear fruit without it's according to the ordainment of God when we're given to experience the fruit of which karma. So we can't say things will always get worse. What actually, if we understand things correctly, things are just as they should be now. We can't say they should be better or they should be worse. What we are all given to experience in each life is what has been selected by Bhagavan for our own good. So whatever any jiva undergoes, whatever experiences any jiva undergoes, is what the fruit of their past karma that had been allotted for them to experience in this life for their own spiritual benefit. So it's wrong to think that things are going to get worse or they're going to get better. That is, so long as so long as we rise as ego, we identify a body as I, we engage in actions, and our actions are a mixture of good and bad. If we by grace, if we have good inclinations, we try to do good actions. We try to avoid bad actions. But none of us are perfect. So long as we rise as ego, we have many different vasanas. So we are all liable to do wrong. There's a nice saying in English, there but for the grace of God go I. So if we think that we are better people than a lot of people in this world, that we hear stories, if you open the news every day, any day, we hear horrendous stories that horrendous things people have done. We like to think but we wouldn't do those sort of things. But actually, it's only by the grace of God. So the saying is, there but for the grace of God go I. So we read about whatever's in the news at the moment, all these the atrocities done by Epstein and his cronies. When we read about these things, it's horrific. But are we any better? Only by the grace. If we feel that we're any better than that, it's only by the grace of God that we don't do all these horrific things that other people do. So it's so it's we are entirely dependent on grace. It's only by we are saved from doing all these bad things that other people do only by grace, and it's only grace that can save us. So the other part was things getting worse, and then the other thing. Sorry, Shani, I've again forgotten the final part of the question.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. Yeah, I'll just do that. So the final part was that, and lastly, are we reborn in the same dream world in our next lives?
What is meant by the same dream world? If you think about every night when we go to sleep, we dream. Is it the same dream world or a different dream world? It's all a dream. So it's all a mental fabrication. So whatever world we're born in, it's all a mental fabrication. So whether you say it's the same world or a different world doesn't matter. It's all that it's the same mind has fabricated the same, has fabricated a world of the same kind. If this body dies, we may be born in seemingly the same world, or we may be born in a heavenly world, or we may be born in a hell-like world, depending on our karmas and depending which fruit Bhagavan selects for us to experience in the next life. So we may be born in a heaven-like world, we may be born in a hell-like world, but it's ultimately what every world has in common. Whenever we experience a world, we always experience ourselves as a body within that world. So the basic characteristics of any world, whether it's this world or some heaven or some hell, whatever it is, essentially they're all the same. There's the experience of ourself as a body, and that body is part of an external world. That's the essential feature of any world, whether it's the highest heaven or the lowest hell. It's all essentially the same. And it's all just a mental fabrication. But though it's a mental fabrication, we don't get to choose what we fabricate. When we dream, though the dream is our own mental fabrication, we can't just shape the dream world as we want it. It is what is any dream is what we experience in any dream is the fruit of our past karmas that have been allotted by God for us to experience in that dream.
This next question is, isn't there a perplexing paradox that the mind that has to grasp form in order to exist is itself responsible for projecting that very form outwards? Therefore, it would appear that the mind is a victim of its own projection, and when it sees that it is responsible for the form it itself grasps, then it is prevented from further projection and then returns to I am rather than I'm that.
Well, we're not prevented. We can still, even if we understand what Bhagavan has taught us, that this is all our mental projection, that doesn't prevent us still having desire for this. Because though we may, at a certain level, understand this is all a mental fabrication, it still seems to us to be very real. So we have that is the help is always provided by grace. But as Bhagavan said, grace has to work through us. So we have to cooperate with grace. Grace is, as Bhagavan said, grace is from within, it's pulling us within. From outside, it's pushing us within. But we have to cooperate with it. We have to try to hold on to our own being and thereby let go of all these forms. But because of our strong attachment to forms, it is a struggle. We have to, I mean, the mind keeps on jumping outwards, keeps on trying to grasp form. We need to turn it, however many times the mind goes outwards, we need to turn it back within and try to hold on to our own formless being. And about it being a paradox, but we can call it a paradox if we like, but it's just the nature of, it's just the nature of a dream. In a dream, we see so many things in the dream. We may have desire for some things, we may have aversion for other things, but they're all our own creation. It's just so long as we rise as ego, we seem to be a body in a world, and some of the things in the world seem to be desirable, some of the things seem to be undesirable. So we desire the desirable things and are averse to the undesirable things. That's all just, it's all part of this, as Bhagavan said in this verse I talked about today, it's all a divine play of this Maya mind, of this mind Maya.
The next question. So my question is more focused on how can we understand what self or I am is, given our only point of reference is that which has nama rupa of the body mind. So from the point of view of a jnani, what does existence look like without any names or forms? Is it a constant state of happiness without seeing anything or knowing anything outside of this happiness? Which means that it's difficult to put the question in words here. But basically, what does the world look like from the point of view of a jnani?
The jnani is, as Bhagavan said, the jnani sees exactly what we see. But whereas we see it as this multitude of names and forms that we call the world, the jnani sees it as the underlying reality, namely Satchidananda. So what we see as a snake, the jnani sees as a rope, to put it in terms of the analogy. So it's not that the jnani is seeing something different to what we're seeing. We're both seeing the same thing. But the jnani sees it as it is. We see it as it seems to be. So we see it as a snake, the jnani sees it as a rope. In other words, what the jnani sees, what we see as all this multiplicity, the jnani sees as the one infinite, undivided, immutable Satchidananda. Bhagavan expresses it very clearly in verse 28 of Upadesh Undiyar. If one knows what the real nature of oneself is, then Anadi, Ananta, Akhanda, Satchidananda. Anadi means beginningless because it's beyond time. It has no beginning, no end. Ananta means end. It also means limit. So Ananta means endless in terms of time. It has neither beginning nor end. Anta also means limit. So it's unlimited. It's infinite. It's got no limit of any kind whatsoever. And it's Akhanda. Akhanda means undivided. It's unbroken. So it is one without any limits. If it was broken into parts, then it would have those parts would be internal limitations. But it is not divided. It is one without a second. Ekameva advitium. So, but because because we now experience all this multiplicity, we cannot adequately conceive of what that state is. If we want to know what that state is, we have to be that. That is, it can never be an object of experience. Who can experience pure awareness? Only pure awareness can experience pure awareness. So we have to be pure awareness in order to experience pure awareness. So that's about the jnana's experience as far as we can say, but we can't adequately conceive it. We can know it only by being it, and we can be it only by ceasing to rise as ego. Can you just read the question once more so that in case I missed something?
Yeah, the question is, my question is more focused on how can we understand what self or I am is, given that our only point of reference is that which has nama rupa of the body-mind. So from the point of view of a jnani, what does existence look like without names and forms? Is it a constant state of happiness without seeing anything or knowing anything outside of this happiness? It's difficult to put the question in words, but basically, what does the world look like from the point of view of a jnani?
Right. Okay. Well, I think I've answered the later part. The world, it doesn't look like anything. It is just infinite Satchidananda, infinite and unbroken Satchidananda. Regarding the earlier part of the question, the clause, given that our only point of reference is nama rupa, it is not. That is, we experience nama rupa, but we also we experience it because we're aware of it. The awareness that is aware of the nama rupa, now we experience it as if it were this body, but actually we all clearly recognize that awareness is something distinct from any name and form. All names and forms appear in the view of something that is conscious. What is conscious? What is aware? That is the awareness in which names and forms appear is the mind. And the mind experiences itself as if it were the name and form of this body. Mind means ego, which is the experiencing element of the mind. But we are also aware of ourselves as awareness. So awareness has no form. We can't point out and say this is it's not awareness can never be an object. So the only way to experience what the jnani experiences, which is what we actually are, is to investigate this awareness to whom all these things appear. What is that awareness in whose view all these names and forms appear? So we shouldn't think that our only point of reference is names and forms. It's not our only point of reference. Names and forms appear to whom? To me. Who am I? We need to turn our attention back to ourselves.